Hello, everyone. We're excited to be here. My name is Lynsey Burkins, and I am currently a third grade teacher in Central Ohio. And this is the lovely Frankie Sibberson.
Hi, I'm Franki Sibberson. Taught with Lynsey for years and years in elementary. Now I'm doing some early childhood work at Sprout 5. So we are excited to talk to you today about classroom design.
I think that's what is key. Like, I love how Frankie said we taught together for many, many years, and that is true. I feel like the bulk of my teaching, I've known Frankie. And I met Frankie, oh gosh, my first year teaching. And so we've
Yeah.
had this relationship since my first year teaching, and it's been 20 plus years. So what we're going to share with you today is really that wealth of collaboration and love and more collaboration and talking and debate. And all of those things have helped us
Running
kind
to your room in the middle of the afternoon to say,
of,
what do you think?
what do you think? One of the things though I appreciate though is that running that like so we worked in the same building. She was kind of down the hall from me a little ways, but sometimes a student would run down with a book that Mrs. Sibberson said you guys have to read this, or I'd run down, or I'd watch her during plan time. But I think that relationship was key because it was always a safe place to ask questions, a safe place to try something. And if it didn't go right, we could kind of think about it together. But that close proximity and both of our willingness to be vulnerable and trust each other really helped us shape kind of our pedagogy and what we really believe that classroom design is and what student agency is and how they combine together to work for students.
And today we're going to really focus on the whole shifting of power. And that's something as we were writing our classroom design book that we really thought about. That really we're designing to shift the power. Traditionally the teacher has all the power in the classroom, and how does design and pedagogy together work against that? And when we think about our journey, Lynsey, I keep thinking about like how collaborative it was. Like it was about the cute tables, and then it was, and we'll talk about this later, but I just remember the first time I came to your room and you were reading aloud from the back of the room. I'm like, what's she doing? Like, and then, and I just would come sit in your room for 5 minutes, and then I'd have 12 questions to ask later. And um, it really was collaborative in a way, like in 5 minute spurts over 20 years.
Well, there was one point where we worked in the same building, a different building, but you were a school librarian. And I had never seen a library designed in such a way. And it really caused me, and I think that's the first thing that I thought about, like, how could I use elements of what my students are doing in this library space into the classroom? And we launched a study that year with other teachers because it just really revolutionized us.
And I do think, like, I happened to be in the library when library design was a big topic. So I was studying that as a librarian, which was interesting. And then it like spilled over to our classrooms. But you mentioned the study. So when we think about this journey, like I think it was the third teacher that we started with. We love that book.
We love that book. Okay, so one of the things, it was through that study. So it was really awesome. Our principal at the time was really great about if we wanted to do a study, she found some money to get us books. And I think we had about 15 teachers doing the study on, classroom design and looking at the third teacher. And this book it's highly visual. And so I think that helped us to no one ever has time, we feel like. So we were able to take just a little piece of it and talk about it for 20, 30 minutes and then go back to our teaching and try something. But it was through that time, I was really able to reflect my own self and my practice and think about, where my ideas of classroom design started. And my ideas of classroom design didn't start because I understood pedagogy around it, or didn't start because I knew that there was some, art and science behind design. It started because I just wanted a comfortable space. And but that comfortable space that I wanted for my students early on, like right out of undergrad, was all centered around me. And so shifting that came years later. And so I was very much centered for the first 5, 6 years of my teaching in the classroom design, and it was about me and what I liked and what was on the walls is because I chose it. And it was about how the colors that I wanted there. And so I think it was through that study, Frankie, that I was able to have that realization.
And I feel like we then went into that language of school design, which helped us with the science of actual, the study behind design. But in the meantime, we were still doing all of our pedagogy stuff. We were still learning about reading workshop. We were still learning, we were still reading people that we loved. And so I think that's what happened. We realized how much was centered around us, design and pedagogy. And as we lifted things in the classroom in terms of pedagogy and what students were doing as learners, then we realized the design didn't match.
So like looking at this graphic here, it really kind of shows, you see the third teacher paired with the language of school design. Well, that's our environment. But then that pedagogy piece, reading choice words together, Frankie, remember how we're like, oh my gosh, it's that subtlety, that flip of what you say really
Say,
takes into that agency. But then Freire taught us, like, okay, so then we could co-create with each other. We could have that co-instruction, but hooks, and I have this book right here because this is like a big piece. This quote I love of hers, but I also there's a piece in here that talks about the early school, like early back before school integration, where there were separate schools and Black students went to um, schools and the teachers were Black and the students were Black, but there was so much joy. And so it starts off with that joy, and that made me devour this book because I felt her joy when Bell Hooks talked about that joy. But then I got, deeper in the book and I got to this quote. Uh, and I quickly shared it with Frankie because I'm like, oh my gosh, this is it. To teach in a manner that respects and cares for the souls of our students is essential. And so that essential piece is like, you have to have it, right? If we want to provide the necessary conditions where learning can most deeply and intimately begin. So if we go back to that slide before, that slide really, I feel like, gives us that basis for those necessary conditions. We've got the pedagogy and the science of school design, and then all the other pieces that have to be in place for students to feel free and agentive in our classrooms. So like if we didn't have choice words or troublemakers, I don't know that the design, like it works
right.
together. We had
And
to
I
have,
feel like troublemaker. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. I
I
was saying,
feel like troublemakers was like wrapped it up. Like troublemakers made me realize how many times I said no in the classroom when I could have said yes, and how much control and power I still had, even though I didn't realize I did. Like I feel like it did for me the next level of choice words. And then we realized, like, why can't they move the tables? Why can't they sit somewhere else? Why can't they why am I here? So I think that was like for me, like the final, like, what am I controlling for kids that I don't need to be controlling? And
why
I
do we have
think these
time?
are like the questions that we ended up asking ourselves. I don't even know if we realized it at the beginning. Like, what does freedom mean in the classroom? Like, what does it really mean for every single student? Not just as a big idea, but, is every child free? What am I controlling that I didn't have to? What?
Like if we think about that, what does freedom mean in the classroom? Like how would we answer that for ourselves right now?
I mean, I just feel like I used to think about it broadly, as a whole, and then you have to really reflect on every child in the room. Like, is this child really free to be his or her whole self every minute of the day? Like, are they free to bring their whole selves to the classroom? And that's very different than like a whole idea of like a free classroom versus thinking about individual kids for me. I mean, that's where I am with my thinking. How about you?
I, so I'm thinking about that, and you and I have talked about this time and time again. And I think as I've encountered situations, I'm constantly asking myself, what does freedom look like? If even today. So if I think about my day today,
Okay.
third grade students, we're in March getting ready for state testing. Like there's a lot going on in the classroom. I have this kid today, so sweet, runs in, throws their backpack up, kicks their shoes off, and grabs grabs the computer. I'm like, oh, okay. So like, all right, like the shoes are off, they're coming off. Like my first gut was like, no, we can't have our shoes off. You gotta put your shoes on. Like, what if there's a fire drill? What? Like that to me, I'm like, Lynsey, what does freedom mean? Like this child came in excited, got very comfortable and started to read with a friend. Like, okay, so that's a very simple, like, but my knee
But it
jerk
is
reaction.
catching yourself, like
Yes.
all the like traditional ways we think we have
Yeah.
to like take control or make
uh,
sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing or what
what
school
they're
says they're
supposed to be.
supposed to be doing.
I also had another student today um ask to have an assigned seat. And like,
Oh,
so in one day, we have a kid running in, kicking off, their shoes. In another situation, we have a kid asking to have an assigned seat. What does freedom mean in the classroom? And so, like, I love that question because today was a really deep day with that, and having a having we had to have a circle to talk about some of the what does that mean to have an assigned
well, and
seat,
you've
and
helped me understand that freedom really is anchored in listening.
it's what do these kids need right now and right here, and how does that need support the ways that they move about the classroom, the decisions they make, the liberties they feel that they can take with their work and their actions. Like, that's that freedom. Like, how do we not inhibit that?
But you're brilliant at listening instead of
Yeah.
impulsively. Like I learned that a lot from you. So I think, okay, so let's
Wait, that
hey,
question about what am I controlling?
oh,
Also, we didn't get through all three of them. Sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
Like, what? But again, like, what am I controlling that I don't have to, and why?
Right.
So that shoe situation, and then also where the kids sit, what does that mean? Um, some kids want control over that and some kids don't. That's interesting. And how do we support student agency in both design and pedagogy? And I think that's what we'll probably talk about as we go through. How do we support that
And
agency?
really thinking about that question of power, like what are we controlling that we don't have to control?
Because we're
Whether
going
that
to shift.
was something
Yeah.
you're going to say or some way that you arrange the room or whatever. Um, So yeah, we're going to start with pictures of our classrooms. These are 3 classrooms. And I have to say, we've both taught in old buildings. We've both taught in new buildings. We've both taught in really great big classrooms with windows and wall space. And we've taught in almost closets. So
Yeah.
we've taught in,
Literally.
where custodians didn't want anything on the walls. We taught, so, we've come to realize that there's just certain things we believe about spaces. There's certain things that no matter what space we get put in, there's ways we can make it like work for every kid.
And I
So
think that's
go
where
ahead.
that agency comes from, right? Like, like the students we're listening, right? And so the students are kind of telling us how that space needs to work for them. Um,
And I
and I
feel
love
like that, when
that.
we read that language of school design, I feel like we learned like there needs to be that whole group space. And then there needs to be places for small groups to come together. And then there needs to be spaces where you're by yourself and you want to just go learn by yourself, or you just want to sit with one friend and think together. And so does our room have all that? Is there a space that you could go off by yourself if you need to? Is there a space that you can gather 6 of you in a circle and talk if you need to and learn together? So I feel like all 3 of these rooms over the years, we've tried to do that. The lots of different spaces. And, when we think of flexible seating, I feel like before when we thought of it, it was just like comfy beanbag chairs and, you can sit wherever you want, but you sit there for the whole day. And then we grew out of that. So now it's really about what kind of learning space do you need right now for what you're doing?
Can we expand on that a little bit?
Yes.
Just because I don't know, we'll talk about what that really means. So that science behind, creating spaces for various types of learning. Well, with that means, like, if we're going to have different various spaces for learning, the the content area that we're in might require a different kind of space for a certain type of student. And so I think we left that thinking of, you're going to sit in the space the whole day versus here are multiple spaces for learning. You choose throughout the day what space works for you, and whatever, whether we're in reading, writing, science, social studies. And so I look around my room, and I think, and also when we were writing this book, we were asking the kids, do you sit in the same spot all the time? Not one kid. They're like, "No, in math, I'm over here because I like to have this whiteboard right next to me, but then in reading, I like to be on the couch, and I like to, have this pillow behind," or, whatever they would say.
Or I want to
But
be by myself for this and I need to think
yes,
with somebody else during writing time. Yeah. Or today I need to think with people, or yesterday I had to write by myself.
I needed alone space.
Mhm.
But it really, it's not, and there were years that I had a lot of flexible seating and I would pass out name tags and that's your spot for the day, still my control. But shifting that and letting go and saying, okay, it's up to you, learner, at where you want to be and how you want to learn in this space. There's options for you, you choose. And it's literally that.
And they're so intentional about it when they really have that space after they've kind of played around and tried every space, really knowing like this is the space I need to be right now and this is why.
The play is crucial in the beginning of the school year, right? Like that first 8 to 12 weeks, you're really learning each other. You're really learning the space too, the environment, and playing around with what works for you. I had a little boy early in the school year say, "I can't sit over here with," you see this round table in the very first picture. There's a great couch behind it. He goes, "I can't sit over here with y'all. I keep talking too much." And literally, I
Oh,
laughed, and I remember it because I wrote that on the board. So we have a whiteboard, and I often write the quote to the kids. And he said, "I can't sit over here with y'all. I'm talking too much." And that was a whole mini lesson the next day of what are the right spaces for you at the right times. Because that might have been fine during writing workshop, but he couldn't concentrate in his reading because he kept talking.
right. But he
But what
knows that.
he knew that. I didn't have to say anything. And,
Right.
and it was a great mini lesson, but really playing around with the different spaces and giving them opportunities to reflect, what space is working for you and why, and how is that helping you as a learner.
I also like, I think we've been thinking a lot about access. I was just in Lindsay's room this week, so we always have the stuff out, like so kids can get it. But I have to say, last year I was in Lindsay's room and she had like the paint out. I was like, you have the paint out? Like that's so great. Like, but this year she just has the document camera sitting with the other stuff. So I don't know if you can tell that third picture. She's got the tape and the hole punchers and the stapler and the paintbrushes and the document camera. So if a kid needs to share with the whole group and share something on the document camera, they just go grab the document camera and hook it up. So I was like, okay, that's just like another tool that they have access to that we don't even think about. Like, do they have access to the document camera? And I think your kids had it before, but not the agency to go get it when they need it. Like it was already set up where it was going to be set up. Where I thought that was fascinating. So
That was a big shift. And what's also interesting this year is they know that they can hook that document camera up to the interactive board by themselves. Like that piece they can do. But if they don't want it there because it's awkward to kind of sit, or what they're doing is a little bit different and they want it in a different place, they know then to ask for the computer to hook it up and do that. And so it is really a decision that they have to make. Sometimes they like to have the document camera hooked up to the interactive board because they have to use the floor then, and they have a bigger space. So they can, that it's adjustable. And so it's really interesting to hear their decision making and listening to them talk together if they're sharing with someone. No, we want it here because we have this poster, we want to share the whole thing. So I just think
it's so
that's
interesting.
a layer of that agency and that decision making that they have to do. Like what's the space that we need to share our thinking with the group?
I
And
feel
whether,
like the more access we give them to, the more you hear stuff like that. Like,
yeah,
like how would we have known that before that they'd want to use it somewhere else? Like
absolutely.
that's
And
where it was.
you see little dog bowls by there, those they that's for them to grab tools and like go wherever they need to. So all the things that they need for learning is right there at their fingertips and not hidden away. I just put it all out there for them. And so did you, Frankie.
Yeah, and I feel like the packaging, like I don't know when we started like making a whole bunch of buckets of crayons and you just grabbed the crayons, or you just grabbed, the markers that you need. You could grab, there were enough that 5 or 6 kids could grab the whole thing of them. And they were in several places in the room, so it was never an issue. Like,
Well, because
like
I
I
used to have them.
grab and go.
Yeah. First they were
Right.
in individual packs, like everyone would bring
And
their
they were
little
in the middle of the table.
middle of the table. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, we don't need all that.
Right. Yeah, so access is the document camera piece was fascinating because I think even last year when we were writing the book, we thought kids had access to everything. And then this year, you've given them even more access to the document camera than they had last year. So, and then the student ownership piece, the document camera, you can see that little girl in the back or those 2 children in the back sharing a book. So I feel like the whole setup of that, just the idea that children are in charge is not using the document camera very confidently is something your kids do almost every day.
Yeah.
And then I had to put this picture in today. This one, when I was in your room that year, like
Mm.
those girls had every tool imaginable. They had the crayons, they had the glue, they had the markers, they had the dry erase board, they had the laptops, they had the scissors, you know, and they were using it all really intentionally as they were in writing workshops. So like they knew exactly what tools they needed. And when they pulled that whiteboard over, I was like, you go, like, what are you doing today? And they had a plan and they worked, but they used every tool and they were very intentional about what tools they got. So it's not like one tool either. It's like what tools are going to work for you today and how you're going to use them.
And it's that constant reflection. I think during share time, we, Frankie and I, teach through a workshop model. And, at the end of the workshop, you really want to have that share piece. And so just incorporating the language around, okay, what did you use today? What were those tools and how did that help you as a learner really gets all of them talking that way throughout the workshop. Like it's not just at share time then because they've learned it. Oh, I need this because, or these girls knew they needed all these things and they used them
They did.
because it was going to help them get their point across in their writing that day. And so I think the whiteboard was for their planning. They wanted to make illustrations where they popped up, and so they had all the things. They had a computer to research something, a picture. So like they had all the things that they needed, and they knew why. It wasn't just gathering things. It was very intentional,
Right.
which was very impressive to watch them.
The intentionality, I love it. And then I mentioned at the beginning, like the first time I walked into Lynsey's third grade class when I used to go in there during guidance time because I'd have like 10 minutes I could listen in. She was teaching from the back of the room. I'm like, what is she doing? And she was walking like the perimeter of the back of the room for read aloud. And the more I've been in her room, she's teaches from everywhere. Like you can see her kind of kneeling. She's kind of in the back corner of the room here. Sometimes she's in the side, but she's never in one spot. And she's sometimes in the front, but not always. So you want to talk about that shift, Lynsey? Because I think that shift to me, like when you said who's centered, you've been really thinking about who's centered. Like I was like, okay, right. Like why do we have to be in that chair in the front of the room?
I realized for the longest time I was having a hard time getting the students to talk with each other. And I, so that piece where Bell Hooks talks about that essential, what are the essential components? If I believe that this is an intellectual community and the students can learn from each other, and I am not the person who delivers the instruction, but they learn it from each other, I needed to get them to talk to each other. To when they wanted to share something, scan the room and share it while you're talking to each other. And I realized when I was up front, they're always trying to tell me. Whenever they had something to share was always telling me. And so I decided to just get myself out of it and I would just start changing my language because Peter Johnson told me choice words work. And so I, would say, okay, what do you want to tell the group today? Or what do you want to share with the community today? And being out of the proximity of their eyes allowed them to look at each other. And I think that
So
shifted
huge.
the energy. And so then I always stayed behind. And I think that, and I wear one of those amplifiers, and I'm very thankful that I am in the school district where we have them in every classroom. And so they can hear my voice from wherever I'm at. And I thought that's all they need. They don't need to see me. So I might chime in, but they're not, I kind of teach, like they're not, they used to be trained to look for the teacher. They don't look for me anymore. They listen for me if they need it.
I love that. It's my favorite.
I mean, I was struggling with talk. Like, how am I going to get them to listen to each other? I think that helped me. It was more of, I had no other options.
Well, it worked. So it's brilliant. Um, And then I think, we've been thinking about like, what do we mean by flexible seating? Like, what do we mean? Like, I think as the teacher, we mean there's lots of choices, but then what does it mean for a child to have flexible seating? And I think, these three pictures show lots of options. Like, I think we have lots of seating options in terms of comfort and like I like to, if I'm writing, I like to sit at a table, but if I'm reading, I kind of like to lay down. And, what
Mm.
do kids like to do? Some kids like to stand up when they're working and we also have lots of stuff that's very movable. You can grab the chair at the table and bring it somewhere else. You could grab those pillows on those chairs and take them somewhere. You can move those pillows somewhere. So I mean, what do you think you're thinking about flexible seating as now, Lindsay, that wasn't before?
I think before I thought movable, I thought largely movable, something they could pivot on,
Oh, okay.
rockers, like, you know, something like that, something that wasn't just a traditional desk chair. Um, but now I think about it something that they can build with, and so that they could see other opportunities. And so I see them sometimes using these yellow stools over here. They put them together and create like a longer bench. Or I have some other benches that are on casters, and then they can kind of create, instead of using it as a bench, they use it as a table, but they make like a desk type table that multiple kids could sit around. So I really think about flexible, meaning what can they use to create a situation that's going to work for them, and it not just be something that's more of a fidget or a, you know, comfort thing. It's more of, what am I going to build and create?
And they do create spaces that we don't think about, or
Oh
they
my
think
gosh.
about some like, I need to do this with it. Like I remember the first time kids put chairs together and use it as a like table together for a couple of them. And I'm like, well, no, that's a chair. You should be sitting on it. No, it's perfect. Like, why not? You know, so all of that, like I think we have in our mind what these things will be used for, and then they figure out a different way to put them together for space that works for them.
I wish I had, and I should have, like, I could literally go through the day and just take a picture of how they build. And
Because your room is arranged differently all day.
it is, but here's what, so one of the things that had to happen for me, and so we are a community, and so we all kind of work together in that. And so they do build all day, and I think I'm going to create a site for our next time when we talk about this, what it looks like throughout the day. But we have a neutral space. It does go back to neutral. So after we share and we're getting ready for our next thing, we quickly have a neutral. We go back to neutral so that it could be built for the next learning situation. It also allows that transition time for them to kind of clear their minds, clean up, get the things back, and then come back together in our meeting space in a spot where we're together, everything else is put back, and they can now have a brand new slate to build for the next thing. So we do have a neutral, and it goes back after every workshop. But I think that time that they do, it's like, it's more of like clearing our mind and cleaning up and getting ourselves ready for the next step.
And I think that's what makes it not chaotic. Like, I think
Yes.
your room is always like clean and neat and put together. And I'm like, you think like if they're moving things around all day and it's, you know, they're sitting in 12 different places and grabbing materials, that it's always a mess, but it always is not a mess. Like, it's never a mess. Like, the fact that you go back to neutral, I love that language. I hadn't heard you use it. That's good.
We did, that's what I use with them. We're going to neutral.
And then I think kids create their own spaces. Like it's funny, like even nooks that we create that we don't even think are spaces, and then all of a sudden it becomes a space. Like, oh, and then it becomes a really popular space. So, um, and then blank walls, you did this way earlier than I did. I always have something temporary on the wall, but you taught me a lot about blank walls.
Well, I read an article years ago about like that whole idea of starting with blank walls. And I kind of thought about it. And at first, really, it was, yeah, that does make sense. Like if we're gonna honor students, and not have ourselves
All
all
over
over
the
the
walls.
walls. But then I thought, oh my gosh, that frees me up as a teacher. Because I remember so many years, and
That's
the
what I
everybody
did.
in the school, we're there putting up the bulletin boards and making sure we're buying all this stuff to put all over the walls that the kids never look at. You know,
Yes.
they never look at it. And so,
And we take it down like in a week because then we have stuff to put up that the kids make.
yes, or not. Like there's times I
Right.
didn't, because I bought all the things, and that's what our walls are
Oh,
gonna look like. And that, do you know what I mean? So like it
yes.
really wasn't in a good space there thinking that way. But I tell you what, they're always looking at the walls because their stuff's up there, and they are able to say, can I put this up? Go for it. You know, it's their wall space.
It is
I
interesting how fast it builds across. And even when I come in your room, even if I come in weekly, it's always different. Like there's always something up or you've taken something down and there's something new in process. But I do think it lets them the first few weeks focus on the room and the stuff and the design and the materials and the learnings. Like I think it's that like if you look at it from a child's eye, they're looking at the books, they're looking at the markers, they're looking at the paint, they're looking at the document camera. You know, there's still plenty of things for them to engage with and get to know that part of the room.
it and I we do in our school district, we do a meet the teacher right before school starts. And listening to, the parents come in because they're blank walls, the one thing they do comment on, I haven't heard anyone say, "Oh my gosh, the walls are blank." I haven't heard that. But I do hear them looking at how the room is laid out. And they are very intentional. They talk a lot about the seating and how it makes them feel, probably because there's nothing on the walls for us to talk about. But I do like that because it gives me kind of like a baseline. Like this year, I really paid attention to what their comments were,
Oh, nice.
especially the kids, because I'm like, okay, that was an opportunity for me to teach. Like they were using words like, oh, there's a couch, it's comfortable, or it kind of feels like my home. And that basic need of feeling safe and secure was forming. But then knew I needed to elevate their talk and be intentional about this space is good for this for me. And so that was a really good, like this year, I hadn't thought about that. And
You're
I
even
did.
listening before school started.
Yeah. I was kind of listening then, like, where can I take them? How can I shift that language?
And then this is, I just think you always have like in process stuff going up on your walls too. Like I think both of us really good at having kids' words and kids thinking like, and not final product, but like you look at this and it looks like a final product, but as they put it together, it's really like a visual of their thinking about a book.
About a book. Yeah. Just, and a little by little goes up and they decide, okay, this was what next. And I think sitting with things unfinished
Mhm. Build
and
together.
yeah, building it together, somebody will go home that night and come back, I know what else needs to go up there because they've been thinking about it. And that's what I love.
And then they engage with the walls in a whole different way. Um, so yeah, and this is that picture. I feel like it's funny because like I like the pictures when I'm in your room, but then every so often you share a picture and I wasn't there. And I'm like I love that kids are reading standing up because we don't really think about that, and for so many years I'd be like, find a quiet space, sit down. And here they're standing up. I love that these two benches are together. I love that he's using a bench in a different spot. Like I just, you've got the kid in the corner who's found a space. I think this just exemplifies that kids are free to be where they need to be with the book they need to be with, however is comfortable for them. And I'm sure there's kids reading together, but the little girls, the two standing up, and we don't think about that. Like
No.
we don't read as adults standing up, but kids might.
Yeah, absolutely. And that happens all the time.
And then those tables, okay, so there are your tables again. And I feel like those tables are your tables that move most often.
All the
Like
time.
they're the borders of your whole group, they push them
Yeah.
together. And I think every room we've been in, I think spaces that serve multiple purposes, like our whole group space always serves then, kids could sit in a circle or kids could pull over a table or whatever. And then I was in Mary's room, a friend that we teach with, and she had rearranged and she said that back corner, she had envisioned one way, but it's being used for so many different things. Like kids are gathering on the floor there, kids are reading back there, they're pulling up a chair for a table in a small group. It's a quiet space when you need one by yourself. So we do think about that. Like, what are all and it's not even that we think about it, but then we watch for it. Like, oh, we didn't think about this space as a place where a small group could gather in a circle, but look, that's what they did.
And sometimes we even notice and name it, like, oh, okay, so this is what I saw you do today. Like, how did that space work for you? What are the benefits of that? And just getting them to kind of think about their learning in that space and what happened for them.
And I love these things that could be chairs or tables. That's my favorite.
Oh,
And then I feel like the year that we found the wheels.
da-da-da, on
Changed
Amazon.
everything. Our furniture on wheels. We could write a whole book. I mean, I feel like we had, furniture that really invites moving. I think, when we put wheels on these IKEA tables the first year, it was like saying move me, and I
They
think
did.
you have those little tables stacked by the side of your couch. I have those little stools stacked, like they invite movement. Like, they're not there to stay. And so I think having furniture that's easy to move is big, but also like the invitation that this is actually meant to be moved. Like we
Oh,
want
yeah.
you to move this to where you need it and to how you need it. So like I think the year of the wheels made us realize that. Like this actually tells kids it's okay, like move the stuff.
I mean, I think the PTO was our friend so many years where we'd be like, can we just have $100 to go to IKEA?
By
You know,
wheels.
yeah, like just really finding ways to, supplement and be able
Yes.
to purchase things, really was helpful because for us, IKEA is local, and so it, they have furniture that we could,
Reasonable.
yeah, reasonable. So like that was helpful, and then finding wheels to make it all work was
And
awesome.
I do think even, I mean, I think I started that year with like 2 tables on wheels and those stools. And I think once you have those, then kids are like, oh, can I move this over there? Even though it's not that easy to move, they still want to move the coffee table over. They want to push the chair,
Right.
and so they start realizing that it's okay to move things. So I think even having 1 or 2 things on wheels changed the kids' vision of how permanent the space was and how much they could own it, which is what I loved. So like what we have about, I don't know, 5 minutes left,
Yeah,
Lynsey.
I think that. Yeah.
What do we set up first? I think for years we set up, the student seats or, and I think now I always set up the community space first. Do
Yes.
you still?
Yes. Because that's the space where like we know we need like I know I need a big piece of real estate, right?
Right.
And we're in there together, and I know that there's a lot of major thinking that comes together. And I think that space needs to be one, a space where everyone can fit,
Yes.
two, a
And
space where,
fit in a circle too.
yeah,
And
yeah.
like for 5th grade, they had to fit at the beginning of the year, and I had to know they fit when they grew 7 inches by the end of the year. Like it wasn't just they have to fit now, but they have to fit here all year.
And it's challenging. And so like we, it's not everyone on the floor. Like, so what
Right.
else are we going to use in there to have it multiple levels? But also it should like it's a place where we could focus on each other. And so I've had to move mine a couple times. So now this year, oh, there's a picture of it. It's in the corner. Before it was more centered in the room, but it just like now in the corner, we're all tucked away there, and
And
we're
I
focused.
love that you could move the perimeter. Like I think that's been huge too, like having a perimeter, but a perimeter that could easily be pushed back or pushed out of the way if you need to get in a circle.
And we do, yeah.
Layers of seating. And I do think like I feel like I set up the whole class and then I set up the library and the library not being in one space, but I feel like then I can fit the seats everywhere else. But if I start with the making sure I have 26 seats, I'm never gonna get the priorities right.
No. So yes, I would agree. The meeting space and then the classroom library. Huge. Huge.
And then really thinking about what is centered and how do we position ourselves, I think is huge. When we think about power, like I love the story, this picture that you sent me the other day. I don't even see you. Like I don't even know where you are. I mean, I guess you're where the picture right here where you're taking the picture, but it's interesting how engaged the kids are without you leading or even in the vicinity of the you could tell they're engaged talking and there seemed to be lots of kids leading the conversation. So
Oh,
centering the text changes that.
and giving them the opportunity to be able to go up there and touch it while they're talking, or, be able to turn and talk with each other. And they were like, when that text is projected, it's all about
And they
them.
don't have to ask you for permission to get up and go touch it.
No, at all.
Yeah. And they did. I mean, it's not like we did do that before. So the last thing we want to talk about really fast is the classroom library. And I'm going to like for 3 seconds, just thinking about the classroom library is also a tool for teaching. So when we think about agency, and this could be a whole nother workshop, so we're not really going to talk about the whole thing, but um, we know the learning environment's the third teacher. We know the way we design our classroom builds student agency and intentionality, and we want our classroom library to do that. So we do want our kids to find really good books. We want our kids to get to know authors and find their next read and be engaged, but we also want them to grow as readers. So if we have our books organized, in different ways, they learn different things. So we learned a lot from Terry Lassane. If you don't know Dr. Terry Lassane, she talks about reading ladders. The goal of reading ladders is to move students slowly from where they are to where we'd like them to be. And I think this is what happens with a good library. You have author baskets. So if a kid reads a book by an author, they realize, oh, I might love this author, or they might try something in a different genre. So really just thinking about that. And that really is connected, but a whole nother topic. So how do we want to end, Lynsey? Like I think we're at time.
All right,
Okay.
time.
I mean, I think that power conversation, we
Yeah.
started thinking about what this means in terms of power for, who's positioned in a position of power. And that has probably been the biggest thing when we think about classroom design that's always in the back of our head.
How do
Like,
we shift
where am I
power?
holding control? What am I controlling that I don't have to?
So our two books really work together in that whole idea of shifting power. So we have the design piece, the classroom design, the classroom library piece is huge. And that book, Classroom Design for Student Agency, really talks about that shift of power from teacher designing to co-creation. But then our second book that comes out this summer is all about what does that look like? What does reading, whole group reading look like? And so they work together because you'll see how that space and that agency really powers the whole group reading. And the shift in power in the teacher when you're teaching in whole group and when you're planning the community space.
And I
So
feel like it's hard to even separate them. Like, I feel like we wrote both books together and we'd be like,
yes,
wait, is this in that book? Because the way the design of our classroom works and our pedagogy, or like, does our design match what we believe about kids? I have one quote to end with that we love. This is actually from our book. So I don't know which one of us wrote this, probably together we did.
together we did.
The less we control and manage and the more we commit to freedom, the more our students learn. And I think that's what's happened. You know, we realize that the less we control, kids learn better. It's not just that they're happy and they're joyful and they feel safe, but they actually learn more. So here we are realizing after decades of teaching that our classroom design is not about creating a cute space, but instead about creating a space in which each and every child in our care can be free to grow and learn.
I love it.
Yay. So thank you, everyone.
So much. Thank you.